How's it going, everyone? My name is Graham, welcome to Two Left Thumbs. Today I want to do a little bit different of a video. With Marvel recently announcing their plans to adapt Shang-Chi into a future film, I thought it would be a good opportunity to take a look at this very unknown character. I'm not pretending I'm some big source of knowledge on all things Shang-Chi. In fact, I'd literally never heard of him. I'm pretty sure he falls somewhere in the list of K-list characters. Largely unexplored, largely underutilized. He had a very successful run back in the day, has odd contributions here and there, but I would not be surprised if the vast majority of people had not heard of him, and so I thought it would be a cool idea to maybe amalgamate all the information I could find in one place and save everyone the tedious task of searching and reading. To give you guys a full picture here, I'm going to talk a little bit about movie news, how it could tie into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, basic notes on the production that's going to be going into this movie, who's currently involved at this stage. I want to talk about the character, his traits, his abilities, things like that, how he developed and came about in the comics originally, some of his key main story arcs that we've seen play out in the comics, and then maybe finally I talk a little bit about how I would like to see a movie of him unfold. Keep in mind, all of this has been brought together over the last couple days of research, and so my feelings on what a good Shang-Chi movie would look like is not going to be the strongest. I'm not the best authority on it, but I think I came up with kind of a neat idea. Hey, maybe we even talk about casting options, I don't know, but that's kind of where I'm going to be working through things here. I think I'll put timestamps down below, so if you check that in the description, you can link yourself to any one of those if you only care about one or the other. We know that Marvel has 2 untitled films lined up for 2020 and 3 for 2021 and 2022. We also know some of the other stuff they have in the works is Black Widow, The Eternals, somewhere in the mix, probably Guardians 3, a Black Panther 2, possibly a Spider-Man 3, probably a Doctor Strange 2. Only some of those have actually been formally announced. Nothing has been slated with specific dates or anything like that, so there's a lot of flexibility. We don't really know when Shang-Chi would be coming out. Interestingly, back in 2006, Marvel made a deal with Paramount Studios that they were going to develop a few Marvel comic characters. The deal included Captain America, Nick Fury, Doctor Strange, Hawkeye, Power Pack, which I'm just looking at the list here, I don't know who that is, Black Panther, Cloak and Dagger, as well as Shang-Chi. Obviously, we never ended up seeing any of those movies, so nothing really came of that. It went back out into development hell. Shang-Chi has appeared in precisely one video game. He's a playable character in Marvel Future Fight, which is kind of their penultimate mobile game. In the last couple days here, Marvel announced that this was in pre-production. It was something they were working on developing. They've already tapped David Callum to write the screenplay, and there was something hinting that they intend to find a director of Asian descent, probably someone who has some experience with martial arts. Looking at what David Callum has going on, he seems like a very in-demand screenwriter at the moment. He worked on the story for The Expendables and that new Godzilla movie. He worked on a rewrite of Ant-Man, so he already has a history with Marvel there. He's worked on Wonder Woman 1984, the upcoming sequel, so more comic book experience there. And he's recently been tapped to work on Zombieland 2 and a Wolfman reboot for the Dark Universe, which is probably just dead and never going to happen. He is also the creator, producer, and writer on Jean-Claude Van Johnson, which is like a parody of Jean-Claude Van Damme's life, to the best of my knowledge. It looks really funny. I think I still want to check that out. Well, it's very early on in everything here. I think we can trust that this is in good hands for the screenplay, so that's good signs there. Now let's talk about the actual character of Shang-Chi, because I'm sure people are curious. What's his deal? I'm here to tell you what his deal is. He's created in the early 70s by Steve Englehart and artist Jim Starlin. The name literally means Rising of the Spirit. He has no other alias. He literally just goes by Shang-Chi. It would be like if Tony Stark put on a metal suit and called himself Tony Stark. Seems like an odd choice to come up with absolutely no alias whatsoever, but it wouldn't be the first time we've seen that. Well, not really an alias. He's often referred to with the title of Master of Kung Fu. And within the Marvel Universe, he's often considered to be the greatest open-handed combatant there is alive. He has a complete mastery of many different kinds of armed and unarmed martial arts techniques. He has pinpoint precision with shurikens and other thrown objects, things like that. More recently in the comics, he has these pair of metallic nunchucks that were actually made by Tony Stark, and they have the ability to discharge this repulsor blast, which is kind of what Tony shoots out of his Iron Man hands. So that's pretty cool. More people other than Michelangelo should use nunchucks. The full extent of his power has never really been quantified, but he very regularly defeats multiple opponents at once and is often able to take on superhuman opponents, despite the fact that he is a regular human. This is primarily due to the fact that he's able to harness his chi, and he can use that to enhance his natural abilities. There's instances of him using his peak physical training and ability and athleticism and acrobatics and everything like that, applying his chi to it, and then he can punch through steel and even dodge bullets. So while not strictly superhuman in the sense that like Black Panther or Captain America is, he could rival those characters. There's one kind of interesting instance where him and Iron Fist go toe-to-toe, and they kind of ended up just having a stalemate. No one really won, but Black Panther saw it play out, and he kind of chimed in after the fact, and he was like, "Shang-Chi, you're better." And people respect T'Challa, often seen as a very smart dude, so we'll take his word for it, not mine. On top of all that, he basically at one point becomes Kung Fu Spider-Man when he gains Spider-Man's powers, but that's like one story arc, and it just kind of comes and goes as fits the story. And then there's other things throughout the comics where sometimes he uses these bracers, and he uses his heightened speed to deflect bullets and things like that, kind of Wonder Woman-esque, honestly. He has these gauntlets with projectiles on them. He's used Pym particles at one point to turn into a giant version of himself, and he punched a goddamn dragon. So a lot of that stuff isn't really powers, but just crazy things that exist on his resume. In a very recent story arc, he actually gained the ability to duplicate himself, and they all have his knowledge and abilities and everything like that. There's nothing that has said what the limits of that are, how many times he's allowed to duplicate himself. It seems like it's been a one-time thing, but it was introduced recently enough that maybe they just haven't explored that fully yet. Pretty significant standout thing about this character, but not a lot to really say about it for the time being. Now, if you're curious about how this character was developed, how he originated, how he came into being a part of the Marvel Universe, I can dissect that a little bit. Back in the early 1970s, Kung Fu was exploding in popularity across the United States. Some people have said there was an era of Kung Fu exploitation, where you take something that's very popular at the moment and strictly just build something around that, just entirely with the intent of capitalizing on something that is currently popular. There was actually a TV series that aired in 1972 that was straight up just called Kung Fu. Marvel tried to buy up the rights to that to produce a comic book series, but that was actually being produced by a part of the Warner Company, which in turn owns DC Comics, and so they weren't able to secure the rights because it was going to be in direct competition there. So instead, Marvel went and purchased the rights to Sax Rohmer's, that sounds like a made-up name, Arthur Henry Sarsfield Ward, better known as Sax Rohmer. So it is a fake name, but it is in fact his real fake name. Thought my notes were wrong. So anyways, they bought up the rights to his pulp character of the time, Dr. Fu Manchu, which, yes, is actually the namesake for that style of mustache. It wasn't the other way around. I felt that was of grave importance to look up. So Fu Manchu is actually a villainous character, and Shang-Chi was introduced as his son. So Shang-Chi as a character was developed by Steve Englehart and Jim Starlin within Marvel, set within Sax's universe of Fu Manchu. You can kind of predict how that gets messy down the line, that they're creating unique properties within something that isn't entirely their own property. It's important to kind of establish that, because for a lot of years in Shang-Chi comics, there was a lot of supporting characters and stuff that originate from Fu Manchu's story that later had to be phased out because Marvel could not use them anymore. It might have been less a case of they could not and that they had the foresight to realize they should just develop it as their own thing. So they gave the character a brief demo. He ran out to pretty well immediate success, so they gave him his own comic book line. Something of particular interest, Shang-Chi's first comic actually debuted about a year before the first Iron Fist, so he is kind of the first pure martial arts character from Marvel. This run was known as The Hands of Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu, which actually ran for 125 issues. That brought it into the early 80s. It was a pretty impressive run. Now for the last couple decades, he kind of shows up here and there. His appearances are sparse, his contributions have been relatively few, and throughout that, his origin and story and supporting characters have all kind of had to pivot. A lot of writers who use Shang-Chi these days will no longer refer to Fu Manchu, they'll instead just kind of hint at this nefarious past of his. Rather than going off all these hints and sidesteppings, writer Ed Brubaker actually introduced the idea that Fu Manchu was a moniker used by the villain Zheng Zu, ancient Chinese sorcerer. So considering the kind of multiple versions of the origin there, I'm curious if the movie will come up with something new or do some sort of adaptation of what we've seen. Yes, that's kind of how the character came to be. I thought that might be worth looking at and something to keep in mind with whatever the final product we see in film might vary dramatically from what has existed in the comics. He has a set origin story, but they can kind of just do whatever they want since they have to bend the rules in the comics a little bit anyways. While digging around, I found Shang-Chi's major story arcs, the ones that stand out, compressed into these nice succinct versions. I'm going to go through this as speedily as possible because I think a lot of this could be used to lay the groundwork for a film. Some of it can be cherry-picked to build a pretty well-rounded story. So he was the son of Fu Manchu, mastermind Chinese villain who was attempting world conquest. Shang-Chi was trained by his father and his father's assistants from basically birth, trained in the ways of martial arts, that is, and while he slept, they would rig him up, and through various forms of alchemy and virtual reality simulations, they would continue his training in his sleep to impress upon him as many different styles and techniques of fighting as possible. So it's kind of that classic arc of being honed into a human weapon. Now, on his first true assignment, he actually discovered his father's evil machinations and for the first time realized that he was on the side of the villains. Moving through a lot of events very quickly, he faked his own death, he found some new allies, he rebelled against his father, and started working as a secret agent. Something interesting that there wasn't a ton of information on, considering it seemed like it would be of relative importance, he actually has this adoptive brother, Minai, which I will never know how to say the name. That's as close as I'm going to get. But Fu Manchu had actually laid waste to this village, and this child was the lone survivor, and he saw this hatred in his eyes and decided to take him in and raise him as his own. He actually became Shang-Chi's best friend. They got along just swimmingly, right along until Shang-Chi decided that he was going to betray his father and fight back against him. Minai was sent instead to try and take care of Shang-Chi as a threat. It ended in this big, bloody battle where Minai actually fell off of a construction crane and broke his neck and was left for dead, as you typically would expect someone to be in a case like that. And really, yes, he was dead, but he ended up being rescued by the Kree, which, that's why I included this whole adoptive brother thing at all, is that Captain Marvel, the new movie coming out in March, is going to really heavily revolve around the Kree as a people. The Kree took Minai, revived his brain, and inserted it into a cloned body. That sounds like some Shang-Chi 1 and 2 type plot building. Spoiler for my own fake plot that I made up. I didn't really include Minai. I could totally see them going that route, especially if they want to continue to fold things together with the Kree. Could be a strong possibility. I'm just looking over the next couple bullets and trying to think of how to make it shorter. He fought all kinds of people. He was better than all of them. He joined a bunch of groups as well as doing things independently. For a long time, a lot of who he was fighting were still being pulled from Fu Manchu. For a character that really exists in his own pocket of the Marvel Universe, doing his own thing a lot of the time, not having a lot of run-ins with other people, he does eventually meet up with Spider-Man when he goes to New York. Pretty crazy that this character that didn't have a ton going on comes face-to-face with like Marvel's biggest character. That was pretty cool. He's also teamed up with The Thing and a bunch of MMA fighters. These are the Marvel martial artists, including Iron Fist, White Tiger, Colleen Wing, Misty Knight. He's been around the block. He's got all kinds of buddies. He's also worked with Black Widow and Nick Fury and some others. I can't name them all. I can't and I won't. At some point through all that, his father does actually die, at which point Shang-Chi decides to retire and he goes and becomes a really good fisherman. But of course that doesn't last long. No one's allowed happiness in these universes, so he had to go back to fighting awful quick. He joined a iteration of the Heroes for Hire, at which point he grew romantically attached to his teammate Tarantula, but he was kind of shamed by this because he was attracted to a fucking spider. I mean, he was just shamed because she tended to be very overly violent and aggressive in her means, and he did not agree with that, so he kind of had this like sad boner where he didn't really think that he could love her, but he couldn't help himself. This storyline was explained at one of the greatest lengths. One of the main coolest parts of it that I thought was the best was that their former ally, this guy called Humbug, kind of got roped up into some heavy shit, and he gets captured. He's about to be tortured. He's on the hook for everything, really, and he tries to throw Tarantula under the bus, and is like, no, it wasn't me, I swear, you should go after her. Let me go do all the tortures to her, please. Shang-Chi finds out, tries to approach things very peacefully and find a nice amicable solution, but then finds out about this shade that Humbug over there was throwing, and he straight up murders him in a passionate rage of passion. So he was all sad about this, that it had to come to this. It cast doubt on his morals and where he stood and how he felt about everything. So he kind of lost his way, receded into his own meditations, and lost his center, kind of distanced himself from everyone. At some point around here, Fu Manchu is actually revived. He's revealed to be Zheng Zhu instead. Steve Rogers tracks down Shang-Chi as he's heard of his awesome prowess and asks for his aid in the fight against Zheng Zhu and the Shadow Council. After which time, he becomes kind of a recurring, valuable ally for Rogers, which is a pretty cool connection to the larger Avengers. The other coolest storyline that I came across was that he eventually joins up with Spider-Man again in the Shadowland storyline. He's helping to fight the Hand, a big assortment of nameless ninjas, as well as Mr. Negative. Throughout this, Spider-Man actually temporarily loses his spider senses, and so he keeps getting sprung up on by these ninjas, and he can't really defend himself, and he's at a serious disadvantage here. So the cool thing is that Shang-Chi steps in, and he's like, Spidey, I got you. I'm great at this. I'm going to teach you a thing or two about Kung Fu. So while they trained, he would wear these magnetic gloves and boots so he could kind of jump around and go toe-to-toe with Spider-Man a little more easily, and he encouraged Spider-Man to take what he was showing him and incorporate him with what he had already, and he trained him in the way of the spider, which is a unique thing that only Spider-Man now has. When his spider senses returned, Peter immediately found that they kind of worked in conjunction. The style of fighting that Shang-Chi had taught him worked really well with his spider senses, so in that regard, I guess he kind of enhanced both his sense and his martial arts at that point. Much more recently here, Marvel now, shortly after X-Men vs. the Avengers, Captain America and Iron Man are trying to bolster the powers of the Avengers. They get in touch with Shang-Chi and try to bring him on board. He was working with a faction of the Avengers led by a mutant named Sunspot. They locate this incursion point in quotation marks, in Japan. I won't attempt to give a full explanation of that because I don't fully understand how all of it works. But really, my understanding, reading things over, is that it kind of feels like yet another way that Marvel was attempting to introduce non-mutants into the world when they didn't know whether or not they were going to get the film rights back for X-Men. This thing outputs a lot of cosmic radiation, which I'm pretty sure is what gave the Fantastic Four their powers, so it kind of gives you a sense of what's going on there. Others had tried to approach this thing and had resisted it and succumbed to it, and I'm pretty sure were killed. He decides to just go all in. I'm not sure why everyone didn't just leave. Put a box over it, a sheet over it, and just pretend it wasn't there. But no, he decides to really go for it. He has this crazy vision and all this stuff going on, and he's offered a challenge to which he accepts. He ends up having to fight himself, which is pretty cool. I know in a lot of ways that's kind of a trope and stuff, but I think that's super cool and could be amazingly well done in a superhero film. He is losing the fight, and only when he, accepts his inner demons and lets the fury fly is he able to get the upper hand and win, at which point he is deemed to be worthy of these powers and he gains that ability to clone himself. Those are the standout storylines. That's some of the cool stuff that he has done in the past. I glossed over so much of it because I don't think a lot else that he's done is super important to the larger universe or anything like that. Lots of very isolated stories. So how do I think this will tie into the larger universe? Where might they take this story? Now that we know Captain Marvel is going to be set in the 90s and Black Widow is probably going to be like an origin film, we know Marvel is less scared about jumping around in their timeline, so maybe this movie does a bit of that too, but if it does, I imagine it would be by like a couple years, not a dramatic several decade jump or anything. I have some ideas for maybe where a movie might go. Like I said, I am going to leave out his adopted brother, although there's totally ways that you could just kind of bend the story I'm presenting to include him instead. There's just specific beats I wanted to hit, and this is the best way I thought through it. We would probably meet Shang-Chi after he's already done all his training and everything like that. We don't need to see him go from a little boy who doesn't know Kung Fu to an adult. He probably already knows it. He's probably already the best at it. We could be introduced to him right when he's being sent on that first mission, not realizing he's a bad guy, and very early on in the film realizes he's on the wrong side. I'm going to completely write over all the Fu Manchu characters and replace it with characters that recur throughout his story arcs that are Marvel characters. So instead we could have his newfound allies that he runs into being characters like Tarantula and the wonderfully named Cat. Just great work on that one, Marvel. I should state now that I think like all the characters in this movie should just be martial artists. We shouldn't have wizards or power beams or flying or any ridiculous stuff like that. It should be people who punch and kick each other, but who do it at like an extreme superhuman level. Joss Whedon once famously said that in Age of Ultron, he came up with using Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch because he wanted characters that did things other than punch. Yeah, okay, I understand that, but this is a movie where people should punch, and like punch a lot. So I have them meeting up with Tarantula and Cat. Another take on this that I would have to rethink of how it would map out and everything, it could be Black Widow, another spider character, which is kind of funny and I hadn't thought of. And really, if they wanted to use the adoptive brother, you could fold in Minai here in some way. But I left them out because I have a particular thing in mind that I don't know would work very well with those characters. So Shang-Chi could have that attraction to Tarantula, same as he did in the comics during the Heroes for Hire. But I don't want to see a typical blossoming romance. I want it to be one-sided, completely like unreciprocated. But maybe she is lovers with this other character, Cat. Maybe he meets them when they are already a couple. So Shang-Chi, he doesn't like Cat that much. Bit jealous. But eventually, throughout trying to take on Fu Manchu or whatever they decide to call him, if they change it to Zhangzu or anything like that, after much punching and kicking with ninja grunts, Cat is taken captive. I really love that story arc of Shang-Chi being the scorned, rageful lover. That's kind of a unique thing to have in a superhero story like this, rather than just a paint by the numbers, you're the first opposite gender person I met, let's love each other immediately. So they go to try and rescue Kat. It turns out that he totally betrayed them and tried to throw Tarantula under the bus like Humbug did. Shang-Chi loses his shit and murders Kat. Now he has to try and reconcile the fact that maybe he is the bad guy that his father made him out to be. He now also alienated himself from Tarantula. He murdered an ally. He probably damaged the ability of the two of them ever being able to love each other. I think he should be full of shame, broken spirit, completely separate himself, try and remove himself from the conflict, and just like bail. He flees, he struggles, he tries to reconnect himself, but he's totally on his own for like his first time. He has to explore his meditative processes and everything like that. I don't really care how it happens, but at some point during this personal exploration, where who knows who else he runs into or what he gets up to, through some MacGuffin, he should maybe get his duplication power. Or maybe he had it all along and he just first discovers it through nature of this very strong emotional turmoil. So maybe the first time he ever properly does it, there's 1 or 2 copies of himself that he fights against and trains with. That could be really cool. He feels strong and confident. He has this new power. He tries to go and fight Fu Manchu, gets his ass kicked because he just has no heart or resolve. He barely escapes, kind of ends up in a world of isolation again. Here, there's a lot of ways they could do it, but I have one particular idea to tie it to the larger MCU. If we have this take place sometime between the story of Civil War and Infinity War, we have like a nomadic Steve Rogers, Black Widow, those sorts of characters. That could also be why Black Widow could work in this story here, and it could establish this connection with Steve Rogers. In the comics, they're allies, everything like that. He meets nomad Steve Rogers. Another reason that makes sense is that Chris Evans said something, he tweeted like a farewell to the character, but the Russo brothers since have had like a little wink wink nudge nudge where they're like, maybe he's not done with the character. So maybe he said farewell, the character is done chronologically, but he could still go back and do cameos. There's like 1,000 things the Russo brothers could have meant there, so that's just a guess. So maybe this grizzled post-Civil War Steve Rogers gives him the pep talk that he desperately needs and shows him the new path. Helps him carry out his fight, but then Steve is pulled away because he's just globe-trotting, doing all kinds of crazy adventures. I don't really know what he was up to during that time. So he kind of has this new perspective as well as this new power. He can take those together. He can go and admit to Tarantula that he was the one who killed Kat, but he did it because Kat was a bastard. And they can kind of reconcile a little bit, enough to work together, but like that romance is probably dead. I'd rather it die and stay dead. And they can go work together with this duplication and everything and go and take on Fu Manchu one last time. Once this is all kind of closed off, they can go their separate ways with a little bit of a nod and like, good work, thanks for putting up with everything to get this done. Where will you go next? What's the next step for you, Mr. Shang-Chi? And really, this could have taken place during the Steve Rogers stuff. It could be a little like final note of the movie. It could be set up in a post-credit scene. But he could talk about how he has a promise that he has to fulfill to a friend. Whether or not they directly show it or just kind of explain it in other ways, my thinking here is that Steve Rogers is currently a fugitive. He knows his days are numbered as a hero in general, but maybe he's also kind of living a risky life and facing imprisonment or death or anything like that. Shang is technically not a superhero. Neither is Black Widow or anything like that, but Shang-Chi literally has no reason to be on anyone's radar as far as the Sokovia Accords are concerned. Up until that point, he was simply a skilled martial artist who lived with his daddy. Steve might recognize this and say that he has a young friend in New York who is in need of guidance, who he would have trained himself, but has lost the opportunity to. Basically, he's pointing Shang-Chi at New York, saying, I need you to go meet Spider-Man. That can be a Shang-Chi 2, it could be a Spider-Man 3, it can be a subplot of an Avengers 5 or something. They sprinkle it in however you see fit. I'm only talking about one movie here. That's beyond movie stuff. Something cool that I should probably bring up, though. Remy He is cast in Spider-Man Far From Home, but it has been completely undisclosed who his character is. Someone said maybe that's Shang-Chi, maybe they already have cast him and secretly are inserting him into the universe. I would be surprised if that's the case. More likely, he'll be set up to be a character like Mr. Negative, which would be cool, because if they set him up, then they make a Shang-Chi movie, then Spider-Man 3 can be a Spider-Man Shang-Chi movie where they take on Mr. Negative and he teaches him the way of the spider and everything, just like in the comics. If you actually think about it and look at it, in the MCU, Peter has basically never thrown a punch. He uses his webs, his spider senses, he throws things, swings objects around, ties people up and stuff, but he never really goes toe-to-toe throwing punches. He doesn't know how. So the main things that I think they'll include, or I want them to include, leaving his father's home and realizing he's bad and then fighting back against his father. That plot of a scorned lover where he ragefully kills an ally, because I think that's really extreme and badass and something worth exploring. At some point he should get that ability to duplicate, because that makes him stand out a lot and makes him more of a superhero. Meeting Black Widow or Steve Rogers or any character like that to tie it to the Avengers, to have it make more sense why he should inevitably meet Spider-Man, and so he can eventually train Spider-Man. Those are the top coolest things that I would want to see in the movie. And goddamn, I've been recording for nearly an hour. I don't want this video to be an hour long. That's not what I was going for. I knew when I had a bunch of pages of stuff, though, that was a real risk. I'll parse it down. I'll try and shrink things up a little. Well, shit. All this reading up about Shang-Chi for a couple days here has me actually excited about the prospect of what could be done with this character, what that movie might actually look like. A really heavily choreographed, well-done martial arts movie in the context of superhumans in the Marvel Universe. Sign me up 100%. I want that. I don't really have any strong casting choices in mind for this character right now. One of my favorite martial artists currently is Iko Uwe. He's nice and young. He's an actor. He's a very serious martial artist, so he would be able to bring that ability to the film, which I want a good actor, but I think they really can't fake it. You need to cast legitimately trained martial artists for this movie. The one thing, though, is that Iko is actually Indonesian, and Shang-Chi as a character is inherently Chinese. So I think they should find an actor who stays true to that. I, unfortunately, just don't have a large pool of knowledge of Chinese martial artist actors to pull from. If you guys have suggestions, totally let me know. That would be one of many things we can talk about in the comments. I'm looking forward to hearing from you on any manner of all of this. If you guys want to hear me geek out more over more comic book based things, I did a series of fan castings for an MCU set Fantastic Four, X-Men, a bunch of future possible Spider-Man movies, lots of nerdy comic book talk. I don't do it often, but when I do a deep dive. So there. Now I have shared everything I've come to learn about Shang-Chi. You guys take from it what you will, and hopefully that sets your expectations for the movie a little bit better. Gives you an idea of what we could maybe look forward to with that. So I better wrap this goddamn long video up. Thank you guys all so much for watching. I will see you again soon.